Hi, I'm Rowena. The night my father hurled boiling soup at my shivering grandfather, just because he wouldn't give up his room for Dad's new wife, something in me broke. We walked out in silence. No screaming, no begging, just silence heavy enough to crush a lifetime. But that was only the beginning, because when they came back, the house was empty, and a man in a suit was waiting. The house was quiet in that way that makes your skin prickle, too quiet for a family home at dinner time. I stood in the kitchen doorway, clutching the edge of the counter, while the smell of simmering vegetables filled the air. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table, his new wife perched beside him like a queen who'd already claimed her throne. And across from them, my grandfather, frail but upright, sat in his chair, the same chair he'd used for as long as I could remember. Dad's voice broke the silence, sharp enough to make me flinch. "Dad, you need to move your things. Starting tonight, that room belongs to Marlene." Grandpa's hand trembled as he reached for his cane, steadying himself before he answered. His voice was soft, almost breaking, but the resolve in it made me proud. "This has been my room since before you were born, son. I'm not leaving it." I held my breath. I wanted to say something, to tell Dad he was being cruel, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't just anger. It was a demand. Dad's hand shot out, grabbing the bowl of soup sitting on the table. Before I could process what was happening, he hurled it at Grandpa. The sound was sickening. The shatter of ceramic, the splash of boiling broth, the hiss as it hit the hardwood floor. Steam rose, filling the air with the acrid smell of scalded carrots and onions. My body froze. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Then instinct took over. "Grandpa!" My voice cracked as I rushed to his side. His sleeve was wet, his face pale, but he sat as straight as he could, refusing to show the pain. I slipped my arm under his, guiding him carefully to his feet. Behind us, Marlene stayed seated, lips pressed together in a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She didn't say a word, just watched with a kind of cold approval that made my stomach twist. Dad's voice boomed again, echoing through the house. "Give it up, or get out!" Grandpa's eyes met mine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that look, I saw decades of sacrifice, quiet dignity, and the realization that the house he'd built no longer had a place for him. For us. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Come on, Grandpa," I whispered. I grabbed his cane, my jacket from the hook by the door, and the keys to my car. We didn't pack bags, didn't argue, didn't plead. We simply walked. The cool California evening hit me like a wall as I opened the door. The sound of crickets carried through the quiet streets, and a faint breeze rustled the hedges. It felt unreal, like stepping into another world, leaving behind the one that had just shattered. Grandpa leaned heavily on me as we made our way to the car. As I helped him into the passenger seat, I noticed something in his hand, a faded handkerchief, embroidered with tiny flowers. I remembered it. My grandmother had stitched it decades ago. Grandpa clutched it tightly, his thumb brushing the frayed edge. My chest tightened. I didn't know then how much that little square of cloth would come to mean. I slid into the driver's seat, hands shaking as I started the car. Neither of us spoke as we pulled away. The headlights cut through the dark streets, each turn taking us farther from the only home I'd ever known. Inside, I was numb. Too much had happened for tears. Anger burned beneath the surface, but it was smothered by disbelief. This wasn't supposed to be my family. This wasn't supposed to be my life. As the road stretched out ahead, I finally found my voice, though it was only in my own head. That night, I thought we were just leaving a house. I didn't know we were leaving behind the life they'd tried so hard to erase me from. By the next evening, the weight of what had happened the night before still sat heavy on my chest. Grandpa had insisted we go back. He said he couldn't leave things unfinished. I wasn't sure if he meant the house or something else, but I knew better than to argue. As I pulled into the driveway, the house stood in silence. The porch light was off, the curtains drawn. Usually by that hour, I'd smell dinner or hear the muffled sound of the television through the windows. Instead, the place felt abandoned, like time had stopped after we left. "Strange," I murmured, helping Grandpa steady himself as we stepped inside. The air was cool and stale, as if no one had moved in hours. Plates from the previous night still sat on the table, the soup stains crusted where they'd splattered. My father's chair was pushed back, like he'd left in a hurry. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Then I saw him. A man stood in the living room near the window, his posture straight, his gray suit pressed sharp, a leather briefcase in hand. He didn't look startled by our entrance. In fact, he looked like he'd been waiting for us. "Good evening," he said evenly, his tone calm but commanding. "My name is Mr. Albright." Grandpa squinted, leaning slightly on his cane. I watched his expression shift from suspicion to recognition. "Albright," Grandpa whispered. "Your name. My late wife mentioned you." Mr. Albright gave a respectful nod. "Your wife trusted me years ago to hold on to some documents she believed might be needed one day." He lifted the briefcase slightly. "That day has come." My breath caught. "Documents?" He walked over to the coffee table and set the case down. The click of the locks echoed in the still room. From inside, he drew a set of sealed folders, thick and worn at the edges, and placed them carefully before us. "These," he explained, "are property deeds, ledgers, and a notarized letter prepared by your son-in-law before he passed. According to these records, the majority of the family estate is still under your control, Mr. Halloway, and your granddaughters." I blinked, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. All those years my father claimed everything was his. Every word he'd spoken to make me feel small, powerless, suddenly felt like smoke and mirrors. I glanced at Grandpa, his hand trembling as he reached for the top folder. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he pulled that faded handkerchief from his pocket again, the one embroidered with tiny flowers by my grandmother decades ago. He pressed it gently between his fingers. "She told me," he whispered, voice cracking with memory. "She told me we'd need this man one day. I never believed it until now." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat almost painful. My grandmother had seen this coming, had planned for it. "Mr." Albright's eyes met mine, steady and serious. "You need to understand," he said quietly. "If your father finds out you know this, he won't stop. He'll push harder. You'll need to decide if you're ready to fight for what's yours." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Part of me wanted nothing more than to walk away, to find peace somewhere else and never look back. But another part knew that silence had already cost too much. Grandpa's hand brushed mine, his grip weak but steady. "We can't let them erase us, Rowena," he murmured. I nodded slowly, though fear gnawed at me. Mr. Albright gathered the remaining papers, slid them neatly back into the folder, and handed it to me. The weight of it settled in my arms like more than just paper. It felt like the truth finally given form. "Be careful," he said firmly, "and don't reveal anything until you're ready." As he stepped out, the crunch of gravel outside made me freeze. Headlights swept across the driveway, spilling through the curtains. I held my breath, the folder pressed tight to my chest. Grandpa's eyes darted to mine. The car doors slammed, and I heard laughter, my father's, deep and careless, mixed with Marlene's sharp giggle. They had no idea, not yet. I leaned closer to Grandpa and whispered steady and quiet, "Don't say a word, not yet." The laughter outside cut off the instant my father's eyes landed on the folder in my hands. He froze mid-step, his grin vanishing, replaced with a hard, suspicious stare. Marlene, standing close at his side, tilted her chin upward and smirked. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed, her tone dripping with mockery. "Another one of Grandpa's fantasies. You'd think by now you'd know better than to entertain him, Rowena." I said nothing. My grip tightened on the folder until my knuckles turned pale. I knew silence could be a weapon if I held it long enough. My father narrowed his eyes. "What's that?" he demanded, his voice sharp, his tone the same one that had cowed me since childhood. Instead of answering, my mind pulled me back to the smell of apples and sawdust, the hum of refrigerators, and the fluorescent lights of the family grocery store. I'd been 14 when I started working there, stocking shelves after school, sweeping floors while my friends went out. I remembered the pride I felt each time the store looked perfect, like it could belong on the cover of a catalog. One summer, I spent weeks planning a harvest-themed display with bales of hay, bright pumpkins, and baskets of apples. The customers loved it. I remember standing behind the counter, my apron covered in flour from the bakery section, while my father praised Marlene's stepdaughter for her creativity. I had designed every detail. She hadn't touched a thing. That same day, Grandpa had pulled me aside. His eyes were sad but steady. "Keep the ledger, Rowena," he had whispered. "One day, it will speak louder than any of them." Back in the present, his words burned in my memory as I clutched the folder. Later that night, after the tense silence of dinner where no one dared breathe too loud, Grandpa beckoned me toward the attic stairs. "There's something we need to find," he said, his voice low, as if the walls themselves were listening. The attic smelled of dust and cedar. I helped Grandpa climb carefully, his cane tapping each step like a heartbeat. We searched through boxes of old coats and yellowed newspapers until he pointed at a small chest tucked behind a stack of broken picture frames. Inside lay a worn, leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked with age. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, were pages filled with numbers, signatures, and notes, proof of the years I'd balanced the books, paid the invoices, and managed the accounts. The evidence was clear. I had kept the business alive while my father strutted and claimed the glory. Grandpa's hand rested gently on mine. "This," he said softly, "is your shield." As I turned a page, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I bent to pick it up. It was the embroidered handkerchief again, the same one Grandma had made, now pressed between the pages as if she had placed it there herself. In the corner, her handwriting curved in delicate stitches. "Trust Mr. Albright. Don't let them erase you." I swallowed hard. My grandmother had planned this. She had known. Before I could catch my breath, the door burst open. My father stood there, his face dark with rage. "Hand it over," he barked, his voice echoing off the rafters. I stood, the ledger pressed tight against my chest. "Not anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I won't be silent." His lip curled. "You think paper will save you?" His tone dripped with contempt, but I felt the fire inside me harden. He stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the light. And then he lunged. Before I could react, Grandpa moved, his frail frame placing itself between us, his cane planted firmly on the wood. He trembled, but his eyes burned with defiance. "Over my dead body," he said, his voice breaking yet fierce. Time seemed to stop. My breath caught, the ledger clutched like a lifeline. And I whispered, so softly it felt like a vow, "Then that's exactly what it may come to." Her laugh still echoed in my ears the next morning as I stared at the ceiling of the motel room. It wasn't a laugh filled with joy. It was sharp, calculated, meant to remind me how small she thought I was. I barely slept, every creak in the old building making me sit up, wondering if my father's anger had followed us here. Just as I was pulling myself together, I heard a faint shuffle outside the door. A slip of paper whispered against the carpet as something slid underneath. I froze, listening. The footsteps retreated quickly, leaving only silence. I bent down and picked up the envelope. My name was typed neatly on the front, no return address. Inside was a document that made my stomach turn. It was a notarized deed. According to the paper, I had willingly transferred every right to the family business, the store I had given my youth to, into Marlene's stepdaughter's hands. The signature scrawled across the bottom was mine. At least it looked like mine. My breath caught. I traced the ink with my fingertip, my hands trembling. The strokes were almost perfect, but I knew. I never signed this. The room tilted for a moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. My father's words from years ago clawed their way back into my memory. Your silence keeps this house standing. Back then, I thought he meant peace, but now I saw the truth. My silence had been their weapon. They'd used it to bury me, to make me the perfect target. A quiet rage began to boil beneath my skin. They hadn't just tried to shut me out. They had tried to erase me entirely. By afternoon, I knew I needed help. I called Mr. Albright, the attorney who had appeared like a shadow of my grandmother's wisdom the night before. He agreed to meet me in a small office tucked behind a row of shops. The place smelled faintly of coffee and old books, walls lined with binders and framed certificates. He looked older in the daylight, but his eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. I laid the forged document on his desk. He studied it for a long moment before sighing. They were smart, very smart, but not as clever as they think. He opened a drawer and slid out a worn folder. Inside was an original deed, yellowed with age but still clear. This, he said firmly, tapping the page, was signed by your grandfather. He left controlling shares of the business to you, Rowena, not them. They knew they couldn't beat you outright, so they tried to erase you. My throat tightened. So this, I lifted the forged deed, is a desperate move, he finished. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing the familiar embroidered handkerchief. The faint stains of old ink from the ledger clung to its fabric, making it feel alive in my palm. I held it quietly, remembering my grandmother's delicate stitches. Don't let them erase you. It wasn't just a keepsake anymore. It was proof. Proof I wasn't imagining things. Proof she had seen this betrayal coming and left me a lifeline. Mr. Albright leaned back, his voice low. They'll push harder now, and they won't care how ugly it gets. I nodded slowly, the fire inside me steadying. Then let them. That evening, my phone buzzed. My father's number. I almost let it ring, but something in me wanted to hear the poison in his voice. Rowena, he said smoothly, his tone sweet as syrup. Come to dinner Sunday. Let's settle this before you embarrass yourself any further. I could hear Marlene in the background, her laugh muffled but unmistakable. I forced my voice steady. Fine. Let's see how much truth you can stomach. When Sunday came, I walked into their house as if I were a guest, not a daughter. The dining room gleamed, the table set as though for a celebration. They seated me at the far corner, next to the restrooms, where the smell of bleach lingered faintly. My father smiled too wide. Marlene raised her glass. To the one who saved the family legacy, she said, looking proudly at her stepdaughter, who sat tall as if she'd earned it. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't speak. Instead, I slid the forged deed onto the white tablecloth, the black ink glaring under the chandelier light. Funny, I said softly, my eyes locked on my father's. This says otherwise. My father's smile froze mid-toast, his glass hovering in the air. The chatter in the room dulled to a nervous hush, as if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen. For the first time in years, I could see it, fear flickering in his eyes. He set the glass down slowly, his hand shaking just enough for me to notice. Leaning toward me, he hissed under his breath, "You don't know what you've started." Across the table, Marlene gave a light laugh. the kind that dripped with false sweetness. "Oh, Harold, really? It's just a clerical mix-up," she said, brushing imaginary crumbs from the tablecloth as though the deed I had just revealed was no more troubling than a misprinted menu. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words cut through the heavy silence like a blade. "I've already shared copies with my lawyer." Gasps fluttered through the room like startled birds. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their smiles plastered on but their eyes darting, searching for an escape from the tension now crackling through the air. Then, as if she had been waiting for her moment, Marlene's stepdaughter pushed back her chair and stood tall, her champagne flute raised. "To earning our place in this family," she declared, her tone smug, rehearsed. A few guests clapped politely, though the unease lingered. I waited for the applause to fade, then placed a thin, yellowed page on the table. The original ledger. My grandfather's signature sprawled across the bottom, bold and unwavering. "This," I said softly but firmly, "was signed before you ever set foot in this house. Numbers don't lie." A wave of murmurs swept across the room. Forks clinked nervously against plates. One of my cousins shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "She has proof." I couldn't stop the memory that came rushing back. I was 16, standing in the back of our family's grocery store, watching my grandfather run his fingers along the rows of numbers in that very ledger. His voice had been steady, even then. "Paper can lie. Ink can lie. But numbers tell the truth." And now, here I was, holding his truth in my hands. The stepdaughter's face reddened. She slammed her glass down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "You're nothing without us," she snapped, her voice cracking. I didn't flinch. "Funny," I said evenly, my eyes fixed on hers. "I was the only one here before you ever arrived." Her breath caught, and she sank slowly back into her chair, the color draining from her cheeks. That's when my father snapped. His fist came down on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "You'll regret this," he growled, his voice low, dangerous. "You think you can tear this family apart and walk away?" I leaned forward, closing the space between us. My voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of years I had been silenced. "You tore it apart the moment you chose them over the truth." The air felt thick enough to choke on. No one dared move. Even the waitstaff lingered in the doorway, unsure if they should step in or step back. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, dessert arrived. Plates of cake were set down, trembling slightly in the server's hands. One young waiter, barely more than a boy, slipped a folded note onto the corner of my plate as he passed. His eyes met mine for a second, wide, frightened, before he hurried off. I slid the note into my lap, unfolding it under the table. 4 words stared back at me, written in hurried scrawl. "They've already filed charges." My chest tightened, the noise of the dining room fading into a dull roar in my ears. For a moment, I thought I might faint. But then I steadied my breathing, pressing the handkerchief in my pocket as if my grandmother herself were there, reminding me I wasn't alone. I looked across the table at my father, who had just begun carving into his dessert as though nothing had happened. My voice in my head was quiet, but certain. "This isn't over." I excused myself from the table, clutching the folded note so tightly it creased in my palm. My footsteps echoed down the hall as I pushed through the side exit of the banquet room, the sound of muffled laughter and clinking glasses fading behind me. My pulse hammered. Whoever left me that message knew exactly how to strike, not just at me, but at the thin thread I'd been walking on for weeks. By morning, I was in Mr. Albright's office, the note spread across his polished desk. He looked older in the daylight, his gray hair brushed neatly back, his suit a little too worn at the edges. But his eyes were sharp. He read the message once, then again, lips tightening. "They're trying to preempt you," he said finally, setting the paper down with deliberate care. Filing false charges is the oldest trick in the book. They want to paint you as unstable, reckless, before you can bring the truth to light. The words sank into me like stones. I tried to steady my voice. "Can they get away with it?" "Not if we stay ahead," he replied, sliding a folder closer. "The ledgers are your shield. We'll respond with evidence so strong it'll make them choke." Before I could exhale in relief, my phone buzzed 3 times in quick succession. I glanced down, and the screen lit up with a series of alerts. "Your account has been temporarily frozen." Then another, then a third. Every major account I had. Rent, utilities, food, all at risk. My throat went dry. "They froze my accounts," I whispered. Albright's brow furrowed as he leaned forward. "Evelyn filed a claim. Says you've been making fraudulent withdrawals. She's trying to cut you off at the knees." I pressed my hand over my mouth, a quiet rage simmering beneath the fear. For years I had endured their silence, their erasure, their smirks, and now they were trying to strangle me with my own life. Before I could respond, my phone lit again. This time it was a call. I answered, my voice shaky. "Hello? This is Officer Reed," a tired male voice said. "We'd appreciate it if you came in voluntarily for some questioning this afternoon." I froze, my eyes darting to Albright. He motioned for me to hand him the phone. "She won't be coming in alone," he told the officer firmly. "I'll be with her." After hanging up, he looked at me. "This is where the storm breaks, Rowena. Don't let them see you rattled. You've got the truth on your side." By late afternoon, we were seated in a precinct interview room. The officer across from me couldn't have been older than 30, his uniform crisp, but his eyes weary. He began with formal questions, his tone professional but tinged with suspicion. Then Albright slid a thick folder across the table. Inside, timestamps, bank records, copies of the ledger, and sworn affidavits that I hadn't set foot in my father's house since the night he'd hurled soup at Grandpa. The officer's eyes flicked over the evidence. Slowly, his expression shifted. Less suspicion, more doubt. These don't line up with the report we received," he muttered, almost to himself. I sat quietly, my fingers folded on the table, the handkerchief in my pocket grounding me. For once, silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. After the questioning ended, Albright and I walked out into the crisp evening air. That's when I saw them. Marlene and her daughter stood just outside, as though waiting for me. My father lingered behind them, his face unreadable. Marlene leaned in, her lips barely moving but her words sharp as glass. "You'll regret dragging us down, Rowena." I met her gaze, steady and calm. "You've mistaken silence for surrender." She flinched, though she tried to hide it with a smirk. Her stepdaughter crossed her arms, glaring like she wanted to spit nails. My father said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw told me enough. Later, when I returned to my small apartment, I found another envelope slid under the door. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. Inside, a single sheet of paper typed neatly. "Attend the HOA meeting tomorrow. Room B, Folsom Civic Hall. 6:30 p.m. No signature, no explanation, just a summons." I stared at the paper, my pulse steady now. Whoever sent this knew exactly where to push. The next evening, I slipped quietly into the back row of the Folsom Civic Hall. The chairs were metal, the kind that made every shift of weight echo in the room. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. My fingers brushed the embroidered handkerchief in my pocket as I scanned the crowd. At the front of the hall, Vera stood tall at the podium. Her tailored dress shimmered under the lights as she clicked through a slideshow titled Campbell Heritage Market Beautification Fund. Her voice was honey-sweet, carrying just enough volume to sound convincing. "We've worked tirelessly," she declared, "to preserve this town's heart. The market is not just a building, it's our legacy. Neighbors nodded, some smiling politely, others whispering among themselves. She had always been skilled at painting herself as the hero. My father sat in the second row, his arm draped casually around her chair, like a seal of approval. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, I lifted my hand. The room hushed. Vera froze mid-sentence, her smile tightening. "Yes?" she asked, her voice laced with forced politeness. I stood, my voice calm but unwavering. "Could you clarify the years you managed the Campbell market? Because according to tax filings from 2017 through 2022, the store was solely under my name." A ripple moved through the audience. Audible gasps. Papers rustled. Heads turned. Vera's lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. She forced a laugh. "She's just bitter," she said, her tone sharper now. "Bitter because she walked away." I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked to the side table and laid a manila folder on it. "Anyone who's curious is welcome to review these records," I said evenly. "They're public documents." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Mrs. Talbot, a respected neighbor in her 70s, pushed herself to her feet. Her cane tapped the floor as she steadied herself. "I remember her unlocking those doors every morning," she said, her voice carrying weight. "Don't erase what we all saw." Murmurs of agreement swept the room. Several others nodded, recalling the years I ran the store while Vera was nowhere to be found. Vera's confident facade cracked. She stammered, cheeks flushed. "This is ridiculous. She's just trying to stir drama." But the doubt had already spread. Later that night, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened my long-dormant Facebook account. I uploaded a scanned section of my father's will, the part that clearly listed me as the heir to the majority of the estate. My caption was simple. "Legacy isn't inherited, it's built." Within hours, the comments poured in. Former employees, neighbors, even old customers. I worked those years. She was the only one running it. Finally, the truth comes out. We knew Vera was lying. By morning, Vera's carefully built image was unraveling. Community sponsors who had been parading her as a local savior pulled their support. Screenshots of her recent reels appeared online, paired with old footage of me cutting the ribbon at the market years earlier. Her social media bio shrank almost overnight. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Evelyn. Her voice was clipped, strained. "You've made your point. Enough already. Come to the house. Alone." I deleted it without a second thought. Seconds later, a new text appeared from Vera. "If you think this makes you strong, you're delusional." My fingers hovered only a moment before I typed back, "I'm not trying to look strong. I just stopped playing weak." I set the phone down, the steam from my coffee curling into the morning air. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing on my own, and I thought the storm had passed, until Mr. Albright called with a tone I'd never heard before. His voice was clipped, steady, and without its usual warmth. "Rowena, it's time. They've called for mediation. You'll want to be there." By the next morning, I found myself standing in front of the glass doors of Thatcher Lowell LLP's mediation suite. My reflection looked back at me, older than I remembered, wearier, but unbroken. I tucked the embroidered handkerchief deeper into my coat pocket and pushed the door open. Inside, Evelyn and Vera sat stiffly at the long oak table, flanked by a nervous young attorney whose suit looked borrowed. Papers were spread in front of him, though he avoided my eyes. The mediator, a gray-haired man with calm, detached eyes, cleared his throat. "This is a confidential settlement session," he began. "The goal here is resolution without escalation." Evelyn leaned back, her fingers drumming lightly against her water glass. "Let's keep this simple," she said smoothly, like she was doing me a favor. The attorney shuffled his notes, then read aloud. "The proposal, a modest profit-sharing arrangement. In exchange, Ms. Rowena will cease all public claims and agree to a non-disparagement clause, effective immediately. Vera smirked, her voice dripping sugar. It's more than fair, considering the mess you've made. I kept my expression calm, though inside my pulse pounded. Slowly, I slid a slim folder across the table. Before we talk about fairness, I said evenly, you'll want to see this. Evelyn's hand stilled. Vera reached first, flipping the cover open. Her face drained of color as she scanned the notarized amendments to my father's will, granting me exclusive rights to the Campbell market. Beside them were detailed accounts of her fraudulent community fund proposals and the forged transfer agreement. The young attorney stammered, This isn't... I cut in softly. These documents are certified, dated, witnessed, and if necessary, they'll be filed in court by the end of the week. The mediator lifted his gaze, then opened the fragile envelope I had placed at the top. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's, careful and deliberate. He cleared his throat and read aloud. To my daughter, thank you for protecting the heart of what we built. I trust you'll do what's right, no matter who stands in your way. The room fell into heavy silence. Evelyn's lips tightened, her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Vera's fingers shook against the papers. I leaned forward, my tone even. Here's how this goes. You will sign over full control of the business. You will retract every false claim, and you will never contact me again. If you refuse, we escalate to civil litigation, to criminal fraud charges, and to the press. Every outlet in this county will know exactly what you've done. The mediator's expression remained neutral, but Mr. Albright, sitting quietly beside me, finally spoke. I should remind you that fraud and perjury carry prison sentences, not just fines. Consider that carefully. The young attorney paled. Vera's hand trembled as she grabbed the pen. Evelyn hesitated, glaring at me with an intensity meant to rattle me. It didn't. One by one, their signatures appeared on the agreement. When it was my turn, I picked up the pen, signed in bold blue ink, and beneath it added a line in my own handwriting. The gift you demanded was never yours to begin with. I stood, gathering the folder. I didn't look back as I walked out. The Sacramento air hit me like a weight lifting. For the first time in years, I could breathe without dread pressing on my chest. Outside, I slipped my father's letter back into my coat pocket. It felt lighter now, not a burden, but an anchor finally fulfilled. That evening, as dusk painted the sky, I found a small package waiting on my doorstep. My stomach tightened as I carried it inside. Carefully, I lifted the lid. Inside was the very soup bowl my father had hurled at my grandfather. It had been polished, packed neatly, almost reverently. I stared at it for a long time, my heart heavy. The war might be over, but the scars, they were mine to carry. And I thought the chapter had closed, until I saw Evelyn in the frozen foods aisle, staring at peas like they could answer her prayers. The fluorescent lights above hummed quietly, casting a pale glow over the rows of frosted glass. Evelyn stood there, her cart half empty, her hand shaking slightly as she clutched a stack of coupons. Her hair was undone, makeup smudged, and for the first time in my life, she looked small. Not fierce, not smug, just a woman who had lost more than she'd ever admit. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. No insults, no accusations, just silence heavy enough to press on both our chests. She took a tentative step toward me, her lips parting. I didn't think you'd stay standing, she whispered. I kept my voice steady, quiet but firm. That's what you always miscalculated. Her shoulders sagged, as though the fight had drained out of her. She gave a small nod, not of respect but of resignation, and turned away. She pushed her cart slowly down the aisle, her figure fading into the blur of shoppers. I didn't call after her. There was nothing left to say. 1 week later, an official notice arrived in the mail. Vera had left town. No farewell parties, no speeches, no live-streamed community events. Just gone. Later that evening, I saw screenshots from neighbors online. Her social media accounts, once filled with reels about heritage and community pride, had gone dark. A few posts remained, neighbors cutting ties, sponsors pulling funding, the comments filled with disappointment. The self-appointed queen of the neighborhood had lost her crown. I leaned back in my chair, the envelope still in my hand, and let the truth settle in. The empire they tried to steal was never theirs to hold. Days later, I reopened Campbell Market. The air smelled like fresh bread and ground coffee, the kind of warmth that clings to memory. I had chosen to dedicate the reopening to my grandfather, the Campbell Community Initiative. Old volunteers showed up, smiling, sleeves rolled up, ready to bring life back into the place. Children ran between the aisles, their laughter ringing against shelves that had been silent too long. For the first time in years, I felt the market breathe again. In my office, above the filing cabinet, I placed the old soup bowl, not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. Its porcelain gleamed softly under the light, carrying both the violence that had shattered us and the endurance that had kept us standing. That evening, Grandpa and I sat down for dinner at the small wooden table in my apartment. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. He set his fork down, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. "Your father thought power meant control," he said softly, his voice steady despite the years. "But you've shown it means care." I squeezed his hand gently, tears stinging the corners of my eyes but refusing to fall. "We're finally home, Grandpa. Not just in a house, in a place where we belong." For the first time, the weight on his shoulders seemed lighter. We ate quietly, no need for words. Silence had once been my prison. Now, it was peace. Later that week, as the sun dipped behind the market windows, I walked through the aisles, greeting familiar faces. Neighbors stopped to hug me, volunteers waved from behind counters. I caught my reflection in the glass door, older, yes, but strong. Whole. Narrating silently in my mind, I thought, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, when those who tried to erase you are erased themselves. The last rays of sunlight caught the soup bowl on the shelf, sending a glimmer across the room. I touched it briefly, not with bitterness, but with a quiet smile. It no longer bound me to the past. It reminded me I had survived it. I turned off the lights, the market settling into stillness for the night. And with that, I locked the door of the market, my market, for the night, knowing I'd never be the shadow in someone else's story again.